Good afternoon. My name is Marty Culpepper. I'm a professor of mechanical engineering at MIT. I'm also the director of Project Manus, and we're here today to talk about community and culture in makerspaces. I'm joined by Paula Anzer. She's the leader of the Make Impact Consortium for Project Manus, and then also we'll be joined by two student mentors in our makerspaces, Michael Buckman, who's the student president of the MIT Maker Workshop, and then Sean will also be joining us. Today we plan to basically talk here via slides for about 20 minutes. Going to do a short review for newcomers that may not be familiar with Make Impact, and then we'll talk about the detailed content, community, and culture. We'll then break and we'll move into a question and answer session with myself and then the two student mentors. Let's start with what is Make Impact. Make Impact is a consortium that's being put together by a group of schools to help each other figure out the best ways to make impact via building better maker spaces, building better entrepreneurship programs, and then integrating both of those together so that you can have both makers and entrepreneurs working together to build real value in companies. This requires that people have access to curriculum and various other sorts of resources that are required to make this work smoothly. And so those will also be a key defining element of the consortium, is tangible things that schools can use to help build better maker spaces, entrepreneurship spaces, and then integrate programming. Today, community and culture, our topic, fits within best practices for maker spaces. This is a key thing that people really need to understand with respect to maker spaces, because if you do not get community and culture right, it's virtually impossible for your maker space to work properly. People spent millions of dollars building shiny maker spaces, and then none of the students come because they did not get community and culture right. So this is our first technical webinar because we want to make sure that everybody gets started off on the right foot, and that is community and culture. Now, more broadly, the consortium is going to help educate students with respect to making and entrepreneurship, help people really understand the import of community and help them build that community both within their maker spaces and their entrepreneurship spaces, and then help people get access to infrastructure, whether or not it be meeting spaces where students have to, that students need to sit and work on a project together, or milling machines or 3D printers. We're going to move on now to the technical content for today, and that is community and culture in maker spaces. I cannot stress enough that this really is the most important thing. And we're going to go through some examples here to help you understand why this is so important. The most common mistake that people make when they build a maker space is that they are thinking about construction, so they want to construct it. What you really should be doing is collaborating to figure out how a maker space should be built in the beginning. By constructing, what do I mean by that? Well, people typically come to me and they say, what list of machines do I need to build my maker space? Or how should I lay my machines out in my makerspace, all right? And the key problem with that is they're focused on the machines and the space, and they haven't yet focused on the people. There's a reason that makerspace has maker in it, because it's a space built for makers. It's not a space built for equipment. We typically call a space that's been constructed a machine mausoleum. And this is, you find these at a bunch of different universities where you walk in, the latest and greatest in equipment, brightly lit spaces, fancy things all over the place, but nobody uses them. And so it's millions of dollars, and a large chunk of space resource that's gone to waste because people built that space for the machines. And I guess it's doing its job, it's holding the machines, but it was not built to draw in and support the people. So this is an example here of a machine shop that you might find in a university setting. And if you come in with the viewpoint that this is what I'm trying to create, is a room full of machines, that viewpoint is going to lead you to things like, all right, what machine should I buy? How many technicians do I need to run the space? How many safety signs do I need to put up? What, do I need to write 10 pages of safety documents to make sure the space is safe? None of that focuses on the people that are going to be in the space. And maker spaces are all about the people that are going to use the spaces. I can't tell you the number of people I've seen that have gone down that path only to realize 2 or 3 years in and hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars in that they've done the wrong thing. All right, we're going to talk about the right thing to do, the collaborative effort. And what I mean by this is engaging the makers early on and in a significant and substantial way in figuring out what the makerspace is going to be and how it's going to be run. This has to be a space for makers, and it has to be done by makers to some extent. So for example, if you have this perspective, all right, who are the makers going to be? What do they want to use? How are they going to be in the space? And how can they help to build it? If you're focused on all your questions and your thoughts on the people instead of the stuff inside of the space, you're on the right track, right? That's going to lead you to build a space that's built for the makers. And then it also has a side effect too, that if the makers are helping to build that, that gives them some sense of ownership and can then lead on to empowerment in their activities within the spaces. That is also very important. Makers need to feel like a space is their own. Not that they're walking into a space that somebody else fully owns and is only going to let them use in a very narrow sort of ways. How do you know if your makerspace is working well? Well, if you hold events and this is what your makerspace looks like, your makerspace is looking pretty well. Whereas if you hold events or you try to open up a space and have a hackathon and a few people come, this is usually a sign that your space is not working all that well. What's the difference there? If you have a community of people that care about that space, if you have a community of people that care about each other, they'll show up to help each other make, they'll show up to celebrate events. There you see on the screen in front of you the community that belongs to this makerspace. In the absence of that, without a community, it's just a space that people use, and people aren't going to come around except when they need to use it. So we're going to watch a video now that talks about empowering and enabling makers. And this video more specifically focuses on the student makers we have at MIT and how we rely on those students to help other students learn to make and to maintain makerspaces.
As a child, I was absolutely obsessed with Legos.
I found the book on building a robot.
It's in my blood. Making is in my blood.
Oh my God, the cold saw, the best thing in the world. It's beautiful. Like, cold saw was my crush.
Parts scattered all over the floor. I had to pay my sister to clean it up when we had guests because my parents would send me down there. 3 hours later, I'd have made something new instead of having cleaned.
It feels really badass. I'm not sure if I can say that on camera, but it really does feel like, oh wow, I just used that very scary machine and I made something with it out of metal.
Where else on the planet are you going to have a high density of people that simultaneously build things and they want to be nerds?
I was around 13 or 14 at the time, and here I am now.
MIT students are the craziest, and I mean that in a good and loving way, the craziest bunch of people that I have ever had to work with. I mean, like, students that said they were going to design a gadget that Batman has to climb up walls, like to climb up 3 stories in a few seconds. And you think, well, that's crazy talk. And then 3 months later, they have the prototype built and they demonstrate it. The students are everything in a makerspace.
One of the mentors actually, I was sitting in MakerWorks complaining about how my fish tails are not turning out well, and he's like, I can help you out with that. Turns out he had like a lot of experience with molding out stuff. So he told me like, oh, this is how you wanted to make it, this is where the air vents have to be, and then actually showed me how to 3D print. And now I'm on the laser cutting team myself, which is kind of funny.
MakerWorks is run by graduate students, and the key decision there was to have a makerspace where students could be advised by people that were not only expert makers, but they were also degreed engineers. So they could help you, and this is very important at MIT, they could help you make something, but they could also help you make good decisions about how you engineer and manufacture something.
The hands-on component is essential. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I came to MIT. I mean, our motto is mens et manus, mind in hand. You need both.
What we know from students getting hands-on education, it totally changes the way that you learn, and it transforms the way that you think.
Making and engineering go hand in hand. You can't engineer something if you don't think through the full process. I think that's because you're only a half-complete engineer if you only ever focus on the design without ever thinking about how you're physically going to implement it.
I will tell you this, that many people here at MIT thought that students did not have what it took to set up a facility like that, to run a facility, to keep it running. They have come up with things in the MakerWorks that other facilities across campus have adopted. They have schools from across the globe ask them to use their material. Two best practices that stand out in my mind as the most important. The student volunteers themselves. I'd say, wanting to be a mentor, being safety-minded, being responsible, being approachable, being very patient. Those are key things that we look for in our students. I can teach anybody how to run a machine. But the most important thing is, are you going to be able to interact with the students and help them do making in a safe way? How do you set up the facility so that it's most useful for people and they feel like they can get things done in there as autonomously as possible? If they forget something like a minor setting, they've created refresher guides, and then that enables them to continue on with their work without having to reach out and use volunteers' time that may be needed for more neophytes in the space.
It goes beyond just the training, because training alone, okay, you learn how to use a machine, so what? But by talking to the mentors, the staff of the MIT MakerWorks, you learn tips and tricks, you learn stories, you learn what works, what doesn't work. It's sort of passing on that engineering making tradition. There's that cliche of, you learn through failure. The trick is you learn through other people's failures, because then you don't have to make as many failures yourself, right? I mean, you're still going to fail eventually, but at least you can sort of speed up the process by learning from other people's mistakes.
Find a project, either academic or personal, that will get you in the shop. Go in there and just start chatting with like-minded folks, and it'll bring you into our world.
Some of the students find this to be the place where they really experience MIT.
In a way, it's oddly therapeutic. There's something to be said about the benefit of just being behind like a mill for 3 hours cranking out a part. Now you have something that you can hold and be like, I designed it and I made it.
Did you ever build that robot?
I did. I actually still have it. I kept it all these years. And I still have it with me as a reminder of my roots, where I came from.
Here.
So the key things that we wanted you to get from that video is that having your student makers involved within a makerspace is a very valuable thing. Now, there's a spectrum. You can have makerspaces that are run by students. So the makerspace that you just saw, the MIT Maker Workshop, is an example of that. And all the way to the other end of the spectrum, where you have technicians that are nominally in charge of most things in a makerspace, but then also the students somehow can be involved. It's very hard to have a vibrant makerspace where you have a very top-down organizational structure where it's the technicians run and control everything, and then the makers can just come in, under strict guidance and use the space. These spaces really don't tend to work out very well. And we're going to go through an example here, an analogy that'll help you understand why. All right, so we're going to take a look at another kind of space, a living space that's analogous to a makerspace, and draw some conclusions from that. And the conclusion is going to be that just like with a home, you can't build a home for somebody. They want to build basically the insides of their home. They want to have control and ownership over that. Only they, the people that are going to be living in a home, know what they're going to want. Similar for maker spaces. If makers are going to be the ones that quote unquote live in the space, they're the ones that need to be deeply involved in figuring out what's going to be in it, how it'll be used, etc. So we'll go a little bit deeper into the analogy on living spaces, and we'll start here with 3 columns. And in each column, there's a different kind of living space. One of these columns is a home, one of these columns is an apartment, and one of these columns is a hotel. So 3 different living spaces. I think everybody has this feel of, yeah, these are different. If I walk into one versus another, it's a very different feel and way that you interact with it. Well, I challenge you to look at these 3 columns and tell me whether or not you can guess which one is a home, which one is an apartment, and which one is a hotel. They all have a living room. They all have a kitchen. They all have a bathroom, and they all have a bedroom. And so the question is, which is which? Well, the answer is what you see on the screen: the hotel on the left, the apartment on the right, and the home in the middle. Now, to be honest with you, you're sort of set up for failure in this, and that I specifically picked a hotel that had a staircase on the left side, so that might throw some people off. And first looking at those columns, most people look at that and it's very difficult for them to discern which kind of living space it is based on what kind of stuff is in the space. It's the same thing with maker spaces. There are different kinds of maker spaces, and they all typically have the same sort of stuff within them. But what really distinguishes the kind of maker space and how well they work is how they are managed and run. Let's go back to the analogy for living spaces. So a home, when you have your home, it belongs to you. You have ownership of that. You can go in if you want to move furniture around, you can do that. You, at the end of a long day, where do you want to go? You want to go home to your space. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, you have a hotel. A hotel has basically the same sort of stuff. Very different feel. When you show up to a hotel, it's very strictly managed how you interact with it. They tell you where to go. You go there, you can't change anything around. And most people don't want to live in a hotel for all of their life because they really want some place that they can call their own. That analogy, the understanding that a makerspace needs to feel like home to a maker, that is super important. If you get it wrong, you're talking about wasting millions of dollars and a lot of space, resources, and time spent building makerspaces. Once you get that wrong, it can be very difficult to turn it back. So the key thing is understanding in the first place how to avoid that problem so that you can get off on the right foot. Let's take a look at the different kinds of spaces that can exist on a campus. There's a machine shop. This is usually run by technicians where they have a lot of skill and they can help you do ultra fine detailed work. There are project spaces, and these are typically the spaces that are built to support large capstone courses or other design and build courses. And then we have community spaces. Then we have community spaces on the bottom right, and these are spaces really where you can come and do anything you want. These are spaces that are run by a community. They help each other learn how to build and make things. They take care of the space. They train each other. All these spaces have different positive characteristics, right? I'm not saying that one space is better than any other space. In any of these spaces, you can have a maker space if you have a community built, all right? But it's typically the community spaces on the lower right-hand side. These are the places where the makers run the spaces, where the makers determine what happens in the spaces, where the makers feel most like they're at home. That tend to be what people think of as vibrant maker spaces. Let me explain to you how this was helpful at MIT and saved us a lot of time and money. We did cataloging of the spaces that we have on campus for designing and building. And it was no surprise that we had a lot of machine shops to help out with research projects, a lot of project spaces to help out with the great number of design and build classes that we have. And then we found we didn't have a lot of community spaces. And what led us to look at this was that we had a lot of students that at times were having trouble getting access to places where they could build things. Now, of all these three spaces, the community spaces are the ones that are typically open up later at night because the members of the community can be there to help each other out, whereas in a machine shop, the technicians have to go home. The same thing for a project space. They typically have technicians and they leave at 4 p.m. So we said, all right, this is great. We understand now that we need more community space. So we understand now that we need more community space to work on this access problem. So we were preparing to build a new 20,000 square foot makerspace, and that led us to put it in this column here. Now, had we built it as a project space or a shop space, it would not have addressed the need for people to get access, which was really the reason for building the space in the first place. So had we made it a machine shop, for example, it would have been millions of dollars to try to reconvert it back into a community space. We also at the same time realized that some of our shop and project spaces really could be turned into something that resembled a pure community space, thereby also helping out with the access. So understanding that makerspaces need to be a home for makers, understanding that makerspaces are places where a community comes together to help each other build. These key things helped us understand that we needed to build and invest our latest and greatest makerspace under the community column. Let's talk about the pervasive impact of community and culture within makerspaces. So, hopefully you said, yes, this is the kind of space that we need. We're going to build it as a project space. We're going to build it as a pure community space. Then the next thing is, all right, fine. We need to figure out who that community is, and we need to figure out what the community wants. So then you go around, you talk to the makers, you get them involved in the process, every aspect of the process, all the way from figuring out what kinds of things people would want to do in there, to the way that they might lay things out, to the kinds of machines that they want, and even the events that they would want to hold within it. That whole engagement process, getting them involved in creating the makerspace, is important because that actually strengthens and further builds the community and can help to solidify the culture. And by culture, what I mean is a culture of we're all going to help each other out, a culture of if somebody sees something unsafe happening, that they can go help the person that's perhaps doesn't know what they're doing. You know, this has far-reaching impacts on a lot of things that are critical to makerspaces. Here are just a few ways that community and culture can help in a makerspace, and I won't talk about all of them. I'll just go through a few of them. So if you have the community and the culture right, that means that you've taken the time to figure out really what the mission of the space needs to be. And if you get the mission of the space right, the community right, then all the other things like, can we be safe? You know, do we have the right machines? You know, are things laid out right? Are people going to want to come to events? Will people use the space? These things, follow right after that. It makes those a lot easier. There's the student experience, right? So one of the reasons for having makerspaces isn't just so that you can show alumni and get no donations and just make sure that students can build things. This is really a key part of forming, a holistic student experience at your university. So when your students graduate and they go to get a job, you want them remembering back on, I had experiences in the makerspace where I made friends. I had experiences in the makerspace where I learned skills that helped me get my job. I had experiences in the makerspace where I was helping other people, and that also helped me when I in the professional world when I left the makerspace. And then I had such a great experience in that makerspace. I really want to see that keep going for people that come after me at the university. So I want to be engaged as an alumni, either through helping out with the makerspace or providing monetary support and funding. Safety then, if you nail the culture bit right, that this space is all about safe making, and that we're never going to do anything unsafe, and that the expectation not only on perhaps technicians and other folks in the space, it's not just the perception that they're going to be the people that police safety, but every user in the space is going to be responsible for their own safety and everybody else's safety. And it's okay if somebody comes up to you and says, look, you're doing that wrong, let me show you the right way, that's an okay thing. That's not a criticism. What that does is, instead of 2 or 3 technicians watching over a large space, basically trying to see if something's going to happen, you have now dozens of eyes, dozens of pairs of eyes that are now on the lookout to make sure that everybody's operating in a safe way. And that's much more effective at creating a safe environment for making than having people essentially babysit other people. And then there's support. There are a lot of studies that have been done that show this is really one of the key places on a university campus where people connect with other people, And we're not just talking about learning people skills and communication and teamwork, but I'm talking about making friends. So making friends in a makerspace that when, say, for example, you have a personal crisis that has nothing to do with making, you have a support network of people that you know around you to be able to help you out and support you. Now, if you get community and culture right, you'll find that after a little bit of what we call social lubricant, that's a term used by my good friend Craig Forrest at Georgia Tech, which is providing funding for them to have events where they celebrate making, just chance to get together and have them chat. Once you provide that and the students really get into conversing with each other and really celebrating what it is that they do, it's almost like a snowball rolling down a hill, It'll take on a life of its own, and the community can be self-sustaining. You'll be able to have events where people come. You'll be able to have people in the maker spaces, and sometimes they won't be making, they'll just be hanging out. And they'll be doing homework on a couch in the maker space. And then somebody will come in to make something, and they may get asked a question. And even though they're not there to make, then they get involved in a making activity. That's really what you want a maker space to be, is a place that draws people in for the community, and then making is an activity that happens around that community. Can also be a great way to get other people involved within your university. So for example, these folks here on the screen, these are direct reports to our president at MIT. We have our provost, our vice president of resource development, our head, our VP, Office of General Counsel, head of EHS here. They had learned about a community makerspace that we had. They were great proponents of it. And then they wanted to come actually get trained by the students that run the makerspace to really understand what making was to these students, and actually to sit down and have dinner with them and thank them for their time for helping to train hundreds of freshmen in making each year at MIT. My message to you, making sure that you get culture and community done right, and involving the students as much as practical and possible. This can be done. A lot of people think that it can't be done. Just like I mentioned in the video you watched earlier, a lot of people thought that the students couldn't take some sort of ownership or responsibility in their makerspace. And again, I'm not saying that the students have to be responsible for everything, but you'd be amazed at what the students can take responsible for. They're not children. We let these folks drive cars. These people serve in the military, and with the proper training and with proper trust, they will surprise you with what they can do. So this has already been done. It's been done at MIT, at Georgia Tech, Stanford, Yale, Carnegie Mellon, Case Western, a wide variety of places across the US and actually across the world. It really works at these places. These aren't just experiments that people have tried out for 6 months and it sort of worked okay for a while. I mean, this has been going on for many years. In some cases at some of these universities for many decades. This does work. And it can be learned the hard way. So here at MIT, when we made the transition to the modern way of doing makerspaces from the decades old, more machine shop philosophy, that was about 18 months of trying things and finding out what didn't work, and a lot of frustration, and actually a lot of money spent trying to figure that out. So you can learn that the hard way, or you can collaborate with people that have already been through this. And this is one of the key things about the consortium, is we have people in the consortium that have been through this, and we don't really think it's necessary for anybody else to go through this. It's really a huge waste of time, and it's really unfair to the students that have to sit and wait while this gets figured out. And so through the consortium, through collaboration, we want to make sure that everybody else can learn what it is they need to learn to create a vibrant and safe makerspace. We're going to talk here in a few minutes with Michael and Sean. They are student mentors in the MIT Maker Workshop, and they helped to bust several myths on campus. So one of the myths was students can't be trusted to keep a space safe and clean, and they've been able to do that for almost 3 years now. It's actually one of the safest spaces, according to statistics, on campus amongst the 40 or so other spaces, and many of those are, for example, technician run. There's also a myth, well, okay, this is great, students did this, so we should replace all the technicians with students in our makerspaces. And that, that is a myth, is definitely a myth. It's not the right thing to do, because the technicians have valuable skills that the students just won't have time to pick up in their time at the university, and so they are needed on certain kind of projects as well. Equipment and salary, we should spend our money there versus these social events. I can tell you, if I had $60,000 to spend in a year across MIT, it is much better spent towards social and programming events than the salary of one technician, because that ends up impacting hundreds, actually more than 1,000 students, to help generate community between them. Babysitting, the babysitting model in a makerspace, where you have a few technicians trying to watch everybody out at once, is better than giving the students responsibility and accountability and enforcing rules. That's a huge myth. We know from the many spaces we have at MIT where students are highly involved, and we also know from our colleagues at other peer universities that the responsibility and accountability of young adults is something that we routinely do in society, and it works out well there, and it works out in makerspaces as well. So we're going to watch a video here real quick. This is an example of what the students can do. This is the Maker Workshop. It was originally a computer cluster, and then we got permission to change it into a makerspace. The only people you're going to see in this video are the students that will become the people that run the makerspace, the people that are hooking up the utilities, and myself. Nobody else. So these are some of the students from that video, and they in themselves, there's about 40 or so volunteers that give 3 hours of their week 3 hours of their time every week to help run and maintain the space. And they formed a really tight-knit community within that space. Now, it did take about a year to get that balanced out and get it running properly. Like I said before, social lubricant is required to keep these things moving. But once you have the community up and running, they care about the space, they feel ownership of the space, they recognize that it's a privilege, it's a great thing that they have access to, and they also see the benefit to their other students. A lot of them, the main reason they're doing this is because they're able to help out their other students to learn as they come up through MIT. Now, there are other hooks, like we give them 24 hours, 7 days a week access to the space, but primarily, if you ask them, the real reason they're doing this is they are there to help out their peers. As part of their social programming, as part of their community building and maintaining a community, they hold Fab Friday events, and these are events that they just run on their own. So for example, around Christmas time, they'll have, come learn to work with sheet metal and make your own cookie cutters. In the bottom left here, it shows that students will come in and give small lectures and workshops on different making techniques and or design techniques if you're going to be building, for example, robots. In the bottom right, there's an example of a joint social program that was held with another makerspace, the ProtoWorks. ProtoWorks is an entrepreneurial makerspace on the other side of campus. And so this was an event that was put together to get the hardcore sort of engineering makers and the business makers together and get them just cross-pollinating and talking. And these events have gone great. We give the students maybe $5,000 to $10,000 a year to run these events. And it really pays off. I tell you, it helps keep the students happy. It helps keep the mentors that run the place happy. And then it makes those connections across campus that build that broader maker community across campus. So with that, I'm going to stop and we're going to switch over to Q&A. I'm going to ask Sean and Michael to join me. Again, they're mentors from the Maker Workshop. And I really encourage folks to ask questions of them because they really can tell the story of how community and culture has been important to them. Like I said, they have to build it. You can't build it for them. You can help and facilitate, but if it's going to be a culture for them, it has to be made by them.
Hey, how's it going today?
Hi, how are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. So I'm calling from University of Maryland, Terraform Works. I'm Nathaniel, and Rick Blanton's also here. So Rick is our technical director of operations for the Clark School of Engineering. I'm the operations manager for Terraform Works. We're basically a makerspace just like your guys' selves. So we have 12 basically labs around campus, and we're kind of going through the same things that you are. So what we're trying to do is, I guess, with this is trying to find a little bit more about like your volunteer program. So can you tell me a little bit more about like how you guys choose your volunteers, how they sort of come to you guys, and then how that program kind of works for the people who are involved with it? If you can tell me a little bit more about that, that'd be awesome.
Sure. So the way Maker Workshop works is we have about 60 mentors who are volunteers, and by being a mentor, you volunteer 2 hours a week of keeping the shop open, so working in the space and mentoring, and 2 to 3 hours a week of trainings where you train on specific machines.
So sorry, I'm not hearing you very well. So you said you have 60 mentors, and they all only have 2 hours a week, and then how much of that is training that they do?
5 hours total, 2 to 3 hours training, and 2 to 3 hours of keeping the shop open. So
okay.
The way we recruit mentors is twice a year. We just send out an email to all our users in different departments and ask if anyone's interested in joining. And usually we have about 40 applications for 15 to 20 spots. And we just add to our pool that way. We've been steadily growing. We started with, as Professor Culpepper said, 10, and now we've up to 60. And it's very easy for us to find volunteers. Our main incentives for the volunteers are off hours access. So if you want to work in the shop before 1 p.m. when we open or after 9:30, only mentors can do that. And it's just a good community involvement. So a lot of mentors just do it because they want to be part of the community. We have a lot of our resources are spent actually with mentor community events.
Okay,
Yeah.
Awesome. And then just one final question. So I guess because they're getting access before 9:30 and after 4, so are your general business hours only from 10 to 4 then?
Our general hours are from 1 p.m. to around 9:30, 10 p.m. So we try to fill the niche where the shop's other shops on campus and other makerspaces on campus, which are staffed by technicians, go home, can't fill.
Well, as a space, if you have 2 mentors on site, then the shop is also technically open. So that's one of the advantages of being a mentor. You can find a buddy, come to the shop, do the work as you see fit, whenever you want during the day. So yeah. By the way, I'm also from University of Maryland, so go Terps. I'm happy you guys are doing this, finally.
Awesome. But yeah, so that was the only question that we had, unless you have another one, Rick.
No, that's it.
All right, thank you so much, guys.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, don't be shy out there. Feel free to raise your hands and we'll call on you. In the meantime, we have some questions that were texted into us. One question from Sarah is, what tactics have you used to raise interest among non-technical students?
So tactics to get interest and use out of folks that aren't from a technical area.
I think the Fab Fridays are really effective on this. So they're weekly events every Friday where we just invite members of the community to either just eat food with us and see the machines, or they can come in, or we have some sort of activity planned, such as pumpkins and power tools, making cookie cutters, lecture, other design challenges. And then
we have an open space in the front where people can just come, sit, use the computers, or just sit and chat, hang out, just to interact with the mentors or the other users on campus. Or they have an idea and talk to some other mentors, like, how do I go about this? How do I get started? And they'll get some feedback. So it sort of ramps them up slowly.
I think here at MIT, free food is a really good draw in almost any instance. I got to believe that that's a universal sort of law of physics for universities. There, in my mind's eye, there are different kinds of technical folks. There are the students, right? So getting people, for example, if you have more of an engineering makerspace and you wanted people from philosophy or music to participate, those could be students from those areas. They could also be faculty members from those areas. Coming up with projects, and really people are coming there to coming up with projects that aren't of the norm. So for example, if you wanted to engage people in arts, you could have a Fab Friday, for example, on woodworking, the kind of woodworking you'd use to do set building for theater. You could also have woodworking for instruments, these sorts of things. So in many cases, this ends up being, how is it that we can find an intersection of interests where the technical folks would be interested in something, not just because it's making, but because in their own personal lives, they might enjoy music. And then other people on campus, that are from these areas that are non-technical.
I'd like to also point out our space is extremely social. We have couches set up in the front, so students who are often not even members show up and just talk with their friends who happen to be in the space, and that builds interest very quickly.
All right.
Okay, Gary, I'm unmuting you. I see you have a question. Give me 1 second. Okay, Gary.
Yes, you surprised me with the 5 hours total being 2 hours a week of keeping the shop open and 3 hours of training that you're getting in the space. Can you go into what are you doing in 3 hours of training a week and who is doing the training?
So the students are training each other. So the 3 hours of training is the mentors are volunteering to train members on specific machines. So,
okay. So it's 5 hours of service, 2 hours of just being there, keeping it open, answering general questions, and 3 hours of focused training for new people coming in.
Yes.
Okay, that makes more sense. Thanks. Actually, well, while we're here, can you go into a little more of what you're doing that training as far as how you schedule that and what level of training you're doing on which machines?
Well, in terms of training, trainings themselves aren't 3 hours long. Most trainings are around, I think, hour to hour and a half.
Yeah.
And then there's other time where, so let's back up a step. All the mentors, each of them belong to a specific machine team. So as part of that machine team, they're responsible for doing upkeep, developing more materials, just general upkeep and maintenance. So that also goes into that 3 hours as well.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, you had texted us in a question earlier about, and some of it I think was answered, but I'm curious if there are any more questions about this, about the challenges of recruiting student volunteers and how to resolve those. Was that question answered, or did you want to talk?
I think that helps. You know, it's a different dynamic. We're a smaller school, so you know, when you're drawing from several thousand students, finding 60 isn't as hard as it is when you're drawing from, you know, a few hundred. And so, you know, what kind of challenges do you have? Where do you have difficulties with mentors that you have to deal with? That are, what other challenges might you have that we're not thinking of, and how do you address them?
So if you guys don't mind, I'll start that out. All right. As part of my job at MIT, I go around and I visit different universities to see how they're managing things like this. So I've seen all the way from the big to the small. Let me start with you know, the way that it's done here at MIT. It's not, the most important thing is not finding someone that knows how to run a machine. You can teach people how to run machines. It's much more difficult to teach people how to be good people. You know, whether or not they're safety minded, are they going to take shortcuts? Are they responsible? They're going to show up on time? Are they going to flake out on you in the middle of the semester and disappear? Are they sociable? Can they really talk to people and interact with them and make them feel welcome in the space? So part of the process, you know, that I've gone through in a variety of different spaces that I've worked on is to interview people, but you're interviewing them as people and not necessarily as technical folks. And then if you find a really good person, you know, it may take some time to train them on a variety of machines, but it's better to start out with that good raw material and then turn them into people that are good at training on machines. Now, that may, you know, for somebody that has a little experience, that may be you just start them out on a 3D printer and maybe a laser cutter. I mean, you're not going to have them training people on a mill and lathe. But that's a good way to get them started, and then they can progress in skill. Now, for smaller schools, actually, MIT here in some way emulates that because we have about 40 different spaces, so there's a lot of competition for students. So it's not like we have a gigantic pool that just gets, you know, sucked into their space. I'll give you an example. The ProtoWorks at our Sloan School, they're off towards the other end of campus. It's not a place where you typically find the tech-heavy folks that travel down there a lot. For example, the engineers aren't down there a huge amount of time. What they do is they partner with us to help find folks. And then also at the same time, they do a lot of advertising to help find folks. Now, we will work with them to train people if we need to. And, you know, I'd like to spend a little bit of time on that. One of the things that we're going to do as part of the consortium, because like we said, it takes time to learn how to do these things. And so what we want to do as part of the consortium is, instead of having members of the consortium spend 2 years figuring out how to vet and find students and train them, is we're going to have a boot camp, a program here at MIT where we will have you send your students to us, and then we will train the students to become student mentors. So if you can find people that are interested, even though they aren't heavily technically inclined, we can help turn those folks into the students that would help to run your makerspaces.
Okay. Thank you. All right. We have a question from Matthew. How can you set up a user-centric makerspace if you're starting from scratch and you're not sure who your users will be or how they will want to use the space?
The way we started is we just held meetings and saw who was interested and who showed up. And those people decided the direction of the space. That was 3 years ago. There was originally about 8 to 10 of us, as Professor Culpepper said, and we had an idea of what we wanted, so we started expanding the group, and we just held meetings and if the people who showed up, we assumed would be the people who want to use the space.
I think a good part of, you know, what they did early on is on purpose making sure you didn't move forward until you had actually taken the, you know, until you had in some way engaged with people that were interested in the space. So if I'm interpreting your question right, you know, you're thinking about building a space, but you're not really sure who are the people that are going to use it. You know, if I were in your shoes, I would stop, you know, and basically have some focus groups. We did some events recently, you know, for something similar, and we called them Food and Focus. So we had people come in during the lunch hour and just sit and chat with us, and we just asked them some real basic, simple questions like, you know, what kind of machines do you want to use? You know, how do you want to be trained? You know, what kind of events do you want to have around the training? So unless you really interact with them somehow, and generally it's best to do it in a social way, you're really never going to get that kind of information. In the absence of that, if you do try to build a space and you guess at it, you may get some things right and you go through an iterative process, but it's best to slow down and take the time to do that data gathering. Another thing that we've done here at MIT for other spaces is we've run surveys amongst the students, and we've asked the students what's your level of interest in making. You know, if they're interested, then we'll ask them a series of questions, and I believe that got sent out through the Chancellor's office, and I think we had almost 1,800 responses to that survey. So that, you know, that's pretty decent response rate. So there are ways to get information, sometimes bribing the students with food, sometimes surveys. Yeah, always food works.
Always.
And if you're interested in doing that, we have surveys that we've run before that we're happy to share with people. And I'm happy to talk with people on the phone about, you know, good ways to reach out to people to get them to come to sharing your food.
Okay, Bill has a question about scheduling space and how long projects can be there. I guess there, you know, some maker spaces. And he also has a question about how many classes would have access to space. So I think maybe you can take a stab at that, Marty, or
So
you guys about different.
They have to deal with storage, so I'll defer to them.
Okay, great.
Storage, that's actually one of the ways we get, one of the perks mentors get. Mentors can get shelf space. We have very limited storage. We're only 1,500 square feet. So mentors do, for the users, if it's a week or so, we just kind of have space. We have shelves put aside where they can put a Post-it note on it, and that tends to work.
Yeah, it's generally just ad hoc. If you have a project that needs some space for a week, we're generally okay with that. But we don't have 100 projects stored simultaneously at the same time in the back or something like that.
And then I think the other part was setting hours.
No, this was a question, I guess in some schools, their maker spaces are multi-purpose, so there are actually classes taught in them, and then there's also open hours.
Can I take that?
Yeah.
And then, so let me start, and then we can shift over to you all. You know, there are different design and build spaces on campus, and you can have community at each type. So we talked about machine shops, project spaces where a lot of classwork gets done, and then you know, your community maker spaces. In a community maker space, you're not prohibited from a student, if they're working on a project, from bringing a class project in. On the other hand, if you have an activity where the class itself wants to go into the space and take over the space, you know, this is kind of a tough sell for a community maker space, because basically, you know, it's the community space and then somebody else is coming in and pushing everybody out. Now, there can be arrangements. And so, for example, we do have a community space here at MIT called the IDC, and the IDC has arrangements with some classes where, you know, they have a set number of hours that they will allow classes to be in the space, while at other hours it's exclusively for the use of the members of that maker space. So I think a lot of it has to do with just everybody being mellow and everybody being fair and sitting down. You know, and if the members of the space think it's a great thing to share that space and to help support a class, you know, then they can strike a deal. Now, if you, for example, what you really need is a project space, just a space that's solely going to do classwork, where classes themselves are going to be in that space, you know, that's a bit of a different animal. And it's a little beyond the scope of what we're talking about today, but I've dealt with setting those sorts of spaces up before, and I think if that's where you're at, it's probably a better thing for us to do is to get on the phone and chat together. But it is possible to share community space. Some communities choose not to, but some will.
One thing I will add to that is when people bring projects into Maker Workshop, we don't care what it's for. And that's something we made the conscious decision. So if someone in December, when finals projects period, is making Christmas ornaments, we won't kick them off a machine so someone can do their class project. That's done to build the community and to make sure everyone feels included and no hierarchy exists.
Okay, I'm going to combine a couple of these questions here. One is about how students being paid or not being paid changes the culture and the community of a makerspace, and then for you guys just to comment a little bit more on how it works to have a student-run makerspace.
Getting paid versus not getting paid. I mean, none of our mentors are getting paid. They're just motivated students that want to help out the community, build a space to serve the larger MIT community. So when I first got here, I didn't know how to get access to any of the spaces, where they are. I emailed like 5 other people just to find a laser cutter. Nowadays, I can go to Marty, go to Michael, or go on the Maker Workshop website and know that there's a laser cutter there, and just come and use it. So from there, I became a mentor and committed my hours because I want to help the community. Right?
That also really comes down to how much you can get out of a student. So that's one of the reasons we do limit it to 5 hours a week of expected volunteer time from our mentors, is we understand they're very committed, and 5 hours of volunteer time is worth a lot of money to that financially if you convert time to money. So
for me, it comes down to the following. I've seen a lot of spaces where students are involved. And again, this webinar is not about, a makerspace has to be student run. What we're trying to show here is that if you get the students empowered and helping with the makerspace, great things can happen. There's a difference between if a student wants to be there, because, just they want to be there, versus they have to be there because they're being paid. That's a very different dynamic. It doesn't mean that because you're getting paid, you're not going to do a good job, or you're not going to be able to help people. But paying somebody to be part of a community is very different from them opting into being part of that community. Here at MIT, one of the things that we try to do is, if students are going to go way above and beyond, something that's well above and beyond service to the community, something that actually is more in service to MIT than their own community, then we will pay them. So for example, with the MakerWorks, at times when they've developed, training classes, for example, we didn't have a good CNC training class at a certain level here on campus. They decided they wanted to develop that. And so we did pay them when they ran the pilot of that class. But when they're solely in there for the purposes of the community, for helping each other out, we tend to think that, at least for our campus, it's better to have that be on a volunteer basis. Now, there's no one right answer for any university. I mean, for anybody that's on the line now, to figure out if, it's better for you to pay or if it's better for you to have volunteers, that there's a larger conversation that has to be had. A lot of that has to do with the culture that you have. For example, here on at the MIT campus, it may come as no surprise that on the Sloan side of campus, the students prefer to be paid. The business folks prefer to be paid to work in a makerspace. So, in my experience, you can have a good, vibrant makerspace with volunteer students or paid students. Although I do think the dynamic is different if the students want to be there versus being paid to be there.
Okay, great. Christian R., you've got a question? Christian, are you still? Yep.
Can you?
Hi, Christian.
Hi, I'm from Europe, from Austria. We met in Cleveland at the ISM. I don't know if you remember, Professor Culpepper. I have a question regarding access control. So if you have a makerspace, there is a certain number of students who can work inside without waiting all the time. We have the experience on a Thursday afternoon. There are so many students, especially waiting for the laser cutter. There's a long waiting list. How do you do access control? Who gets priority, and how can you manage that the students are not pissed off, basically?
So we do a system called controlled first come first serve. So essentially, whoever comes first gets access, and we do a queue from there. If someone's coming and has a very long job that doesn't need to be very long, or is not necessary, can come back another time, we ask them to do that. And that seems to work very well for us. When we're very busy, which is surprisingly pretty often, not surprisingly, we also log that and we keep track of that so we can tell the administration, look, we need more space. That's the other thing that it's nice. So like if you're busy, you use that as a tool to move forward, not necessarily to move backwards.
In addition to that, we also have a camera that overlooks the shop that you can access online, so people can actually just go to the website, see who's there, and if there's a large crowd waiting, not to walk across campus to the shop, and see that when there's a little less people to go in and do their work, so you don't have a large line or a queue of people waiting actually inside the shop for that.
And my experience over the years, I think I've been here 20 years as a professor, is just the nature of is things are going to be cyclical. And people are most happy when they can all work together to help to prioritize who needs to get what built when. That is a great benefit of having the makers be part of a community. You know, if they're all just in there for themselves, if they're all just in there to get access to the machine, to use it, that's very different than if you're waiting in line and the person behind you is your friend, somebody you hang out with all the time, and they have a greater need than you do. And you can say, hey, why don't you, you know, I'll let you go first, all right? Making sure that the makers care about each other, like I was saying before, helps in a lot of different ways. But in terms of controlling who gets access to the machines at what times, it helps out with that too.
I will say that happens a lot where someone's panicked and comes in and someone will let them use the machine ahead of them because they're just nice people. So that's very common.
Another thing too is in a community space, because you know the members want to help each other out. You know, as they get more skilled to the point where it's appropriate to let them teach other members, you end up getting a student body that is much better trained because there's more opportunity to get trained. So for example, you know, you may have a long line, I don't know if this was the case, but you may have a long line at the laser cutter, and really some of the jobs that they're laser cutting could have been done in another way, on a vinyl cutter or a water jet cutter. They could have been done on the bandsaw really because they didn't need to be precision work. And so the students, if they have more knowledge about the different ways that they can make things so that they just don't default to a certain kind of tool, that can help with the load balancing between technologies as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want to take one more question? Or, yeah?
Sure.
One more? Okay, and then we'll close out. Okay, follow-up from Gary. He says, one more question on the training. How structured is it? Are there multiple levels of training? I'm still surprised you do 3 hours per volunteer per week. Is there just that many new students coming in that require training? And finally, how much online training do you require before the student comes in for hands-on training?
So how about you guys start out with how many users you have? That might help them to understand the load.
We have 1,000 users and 8 different machines you can get trained on. Each training's between 45 minutes and an hour and a half. So we really have a backlog of trainings. So even with each of the 60 mentors doing 2 to 3 trainings a week, we still have a backlog of users that need to get trained. The initial way we get students registered, both students, faculty, and staff are all members, is we have an initial introduction to the space, which we call Maker Monday, which is Monday evening. We have a little seminar where we do a tour of the space. We go over safety, rules, regulations, the normal stuff, and then they have access to use the space, but not many of the machines inside the space. And then as they get trainings, they can use different machines.
Yeah, in terms of scheduling, each mentor will set his own hours for the semester or for the week, and users will sign up on Google Doc from there. In terms of online, as far as we know, we don't have any online documentation for the users before they come in. They just do the training on the spot. Not to say that it's not one thing we can develop in the future, but as of now, we don't have any online material.
A couple of the machines require you to read a one-pager,
okay,
but I think that's about it. There's no videos, there's no comprehensive online.
Yeah, and we do have some facilities here at MIT. We've got another student shop that does training, and you have to watch videos, the basics of the machine. You have to take a quiz online before you get to the point where you can come in. And that just really saves them a lot of time for the group of people they're trying to train. And it's also important because they have a smaller facility, so that in terms of throughput, you know, how many people you can train fast, they focus on getting, you know, as much preloaded into the students as possible with video and then a test at the beginning.
All right, thank you all for those great questions. We've come to the end of our Q&A period.
Great, well, thanks Michael and Sean for coming and spending time. It's the first week of school, so this is a hectic time here at MIT, so I really have to thank them for making time in their calendars to come visit us.